A long time ago, while I was working as a barista to supplement my GI Bill and thus have the ability to buy food while going to college, I got into many fascinating discussions with wonderful, interesting people. I met feminists, weird cultists recruiting on street corners, quantum physics students struggling to accept a reality of uncertainty, political science students, people experimenting with new religions or drugs or sexuality. I made my first gay friends, my first Jewish friends, my first atheist friends, at least that I knew of. What an eye opening time. A beautiful reintroduction to America after a short career in the military where most of those ideas could never be said aloud. One idea that I heard was that people could succeed if they worked hard, that everyone started life on an equal footing. This was from a young woman I worked with whose husband sold Amway. This, I understood, was part of that company's philosophy. At the time, I was working 50 to 60 hours a week and going to school. I was earning more than minimum wage, but just barely. I lived in a rooming house, was neither clean nor comfortable. I could not afford cable television, did not yet know what anecdotal evidence meant. But I sensed there was something quite wrong with this position, even beyond my own experiences, which suggested quite strongly that hard work does not translate directly into wealth or success. All this is an introduction to a critique of Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's capstone novel, and the marking point of her transition from novelist to philosopher. Even more, this piece has to be a critique of other people's understanding of the work and the way that understanding plays out today in political discourse. This work defined Rand as an objectivist, a sort of amoral philosophical position that takes its ethics from observable phenomena. Here, the strong refrain from eating the weak, but also refrain from supporting them. The strong have arrived at their positions of wealth and authority not through divine intervention, as in medieval monarchy or pharaonic ascendancy, but through their own hard work and fitness. In the novel, these people, the creatives, are being coerced by a socialist government to hand over their hard-earned wealth to the state, and thus to the other citizens who have not worked so hard for their keep. One explicit force in this socialized government is big labor. Here, Rand paints the titans of industry as the hard workers and the men, women, and children toiling in factories as moochers, takers intent on getting more than they deserve. What we really have here is a sort of social Darwinism where people succeed or fail at life depending on their fitness to do so. The factory workers deserve to be factory workers, and the capitalists deserve to be rewarded for their investment of capital. Each has found their assigned place in life through selective forces. I will return to this idea momentarily. When my friend suggested that we can all go to the top through hard work, this is what she must have meant. Hard workers earn money, can leverage those earnings into capital, then leverage the capital into financial success, wealth. In the novel, the creatives decide it is their duty to remove themselves from the economy. Evil can only survive with the consent of the good. The good can only be sacrificed with their consent. They therefore remove their consent by going on strike. They stop funding their respective industries and collapse the socialist system by doing so. There is implicit and explicit in the story the theme of creation and ungrateful, undeserved dependence. The creatives drive wealth, the undeserving mooch off that wealth or demand it by force through government authority backed up with guns. At some point, the people creating the wealth are responsible to stop feeding the hungry moochers, to stop creating more dependence. We can view this as both a moral and an amoral position, and some would certainly contend that an amoral position is necessarily a moral one. From a moral point of view, consider the therapist who does not teach the patient or client to do without the therapist. The job security is nice, but nobody is really helped in this transaction. We do not merely soothe the client, but teach the client to self-soothe. We do not just cope for them, but teach them to cope. We do not just love them unconditionally, but teach them to love their self so. And thus to find this love in the larger world. Treatment must one day end, and preferably will end because the therapy goer no longer needs us. That's natural. But in Rand's view, it is the patient exploiting the therapist to their own harm. The therapist or creative has to scrape off all the hangers-on. The family that does not appreciate us, the government that taxes us, the plagiarists who do not create their own ideas. The amoral view is that the creative has no responsibility for their fellow human. Each is created to stand or fall on their own, according to their fitness to do so. When people fail in life, perhaps this is sad, but really no concern of those who stand or succeed. This is actually the same view as Anton LaVey, the renowned Satanist. It is good and fitting that the strong dominate the weak. Much of LaVeyanism is drawn directly from the works of Ayn Rand, and therefore they shrug. Atlas, knowing the more he strains to hold up the world, the heavier it becomes, has to put it down. And here we run into a problem with social Darwinists. They tend to be the very people who deny evolution and who are therefore ignorant of how it works. This scenario has played out before. For 160 million years, the terrestrial fauna of the world were dominated by dinosaurs. Dinosaurs occupied every available niche, gobbling up all the free energy in the system, succeeding against entropy by doing so. They were the fittest for the prevailing conditions for all of that time. Mammals existed, all rat-like creatures of various sizes, eking out a meager existence on the leavings of the giants. None were larger than a cat, and all subject to predation by their betters. Then, 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs vanished. Their disappearance was quite sudden. Perhaps it was a literal flash caused by a giant comet impacting the Earth. Perhaps it took a few 100,000 years as the result of disease, as land masses shifted, as oceans sank, as walkways made new places available to old monsters. Still, compared to the time of the dinosaurs from beginning to end, in any event, it's a rapid decline to nothing. What happened when the dominant form of terrestrial life left the system? Did all the mammals living in the shadows die from no longer having their production to mooch from? Quite the contrary. A large amount of free energy opened up in the system. Niches formerly occupied were now open. Dinosaur diversity retreated to zero, and mammalian diversity rocketed skyward. There is now scarcely a niche on Earth absent of mammals. Look, pedants, I know about the birds. It's a metaphor. In Rand's fantasy, perhaps there would be some short-term suffering as people were fired, science ground to a halt, art galleries closed, but I suspect it would be shorter than she thought. Quite soon, all the repressed talent in the world living so far on the table scraps of the so called creatives would find an economy with gaping holes in it. Someone has to grow the food, mine the iron, build the skyscrapers, so they would continue to do so. New capital would come forward quite quickly, eager for the profit neglected by the old capital, and maybe a fairer system would come about, but probably not. This is how evolution really works. The fittest, those up there at the top, are often at the top because they were born there. Each dinosaur did not work hard to evolve from a skipping tadpole to a magnificent behemoth. Over thousands or millions of generations, its ancestors won the genetic lottery over and over again. And so with us, each human did not build their wealth, but inherited that wealth from others, inherited the ability to become educated, to invest, to have something to invest from others. The struggle here is really between capital and labor. We are each born with the ability to labor and to have labored, since the division of labor gave us money for whomever could pay us for our work. Some are born into money and some are born into education. A few achieve social mobility, but we mostly grow up and die in the social caste into which we were born. There is nothing special about the clever capitalist that makes her better than the rest of us. In America today, the best predictor of how much wealth you will accrue in your lifetime is how much your parents accrued in theirs. And the best predictor of whether you'll graduate college is whether your parents graduated college. And this is the United States of America, a bastion of freedom and the classless society, the envy of the world. I suspect capitalism is dying. To protect it too much as a sacred economic system is perhaps to reify it. Capitalism is not a thing, only an idea. Meanwhile, ecology is real. The farmer knows she can only take so much from the soil, then she has to give something back. The capitalist does not know she cannot take everything from society in return nothing. At least not for very long before her profits necessarily must collapse. Our free market system is designed to mine us for every bit of wealth from the moment we are born to well after we are dead. Funerals and probates and so forth are quite costly. But ours is a consumer economy and thus an ecology. When the consumer has nothing to spend, the capitalist has nothing to earn. In other words, when the soil has no nutrients left, you can't farm here anymore. The soil will produce no more crops. It needs care from the farmer. It must be farmed sustainably. The capitalist eyes profit margins. Worker compensation is seen as an externality. Pay them as little as possible. Sell the products or services for the highest price the market will bear. Keep overhead down. Pay nothing in taxes. But then, before long, who can afford the products or services being offered? Who can afford enough education to do more than toil in the factory, to innovate, to create a higher quality of life? My friend from so long ago was wrong. Hard work will not lead us to wealth. What we struggle with here is established systems. The established wealthy in our country are like the dinosaurs, consuming all the free energy with no thought for the future.